The year was 1942. Over the endless blue expanse of the Pacific, American pilots began whispering about a strange new Japanese fighter. It didn't look like anything they had seen before, sleek, narrow, and somehow European. Its long nose glinted under the sun, and its engine didn't growl like the usual radials of Japan's air fleet. It purred, smooth and deep, like a German machine. The first time Allied crews saw it, they were certain it was a Messerschmitt. How the hell did the Japanese get Bf-109s out here? One pilot had radioed, his voice half disbelief, half fear. That question spread fast through the Pacific ranks until intelligence gave the mystery aircraft a name. Tony. But behind that simple Western name hid one of the most fascinating stories of World War II, a tale of ambition, imitation, and survival under impossible odds. The Japanese called it the Ki-61 Hien, or Flying Swallow. To them, it wasn't just another plane, it was a statement, proof that Japan could match Europe's best in engineering finesse. It was their only fighter powered by a liquid-cooled V-12 engine, just like the German DB601 that made the Messerschmitt legendary. The Hien was sleek, elegant, and deadly fast. To the Allies, though, it was something alien, a machine that didn't fit the pattern of Japan's usual agile, paper-thin planes. Tony could dive faster, take more punishment, and still come out swinging. As the war deepened, that name, Tony, became whispered both with respect and confusion. Pilots claimed it could outrun a P-40 and even rival a P-38 in the right hands. But few understood the real struggle that created it, a story of engineers chasing perfection while fighting shortages, bombings, and mechanical heartbreak. This wasn't just a story about metal and engines. It was about human persistence under fire, about a nation's attempt to reinvent its air power in the shadow of a global storm. Japan's. Tony's story begins with a question that echoed across Pacific skies. Who was Tony? And how did this mysterious fighter, born from German blueprints but rebuilt with Japanese hands, change the course of aerial combat in the East? In the late 1930s, Japan's war machine was already grinding forward, confident in its mastery of the skies. Its aircraft, like the agile Nakajima Ki-27 and the soon-to-be famous Zero, had proven deadly in close-range dogfights. But deep inside Japan's Army Aviation Bureau, a few forward-thinking officers saw the storm that was coming. They knew that sooner or later, Japan would have to fight Western nations whose air forces relied on heavier, faster, and more powerful aircraft. The old idea of ultralight, super-maneuverable fighters would not hold forever. In 1939, these visionaries proposed something radical. Japan needed an aircraft that could match the speed and firepower of European designs, a true high-altitude interceptor built for endurance and strength, not just agility. It was a shocking idea at the time, almost heresy to traditional engineers. Most of Japan's designers swore by radial engines, which were air-cooled, simple to maintain, and could take a beating. But the new plan called for something different, a liquid-cooled, inline V-12 engine, the kind used by Germany's most advanced fighters. To make it possible, Japan signed a deal to license the Daimler-Benz DB601, the same engine that gave life to the Bf-109. Kawasaki, one of Japan's premier engineering firms, took the challenge and began producing a domestic version named the Ha-40. On paper, the Ha-40 promised more than 1,150 horsepower and unmatched efficiency for its size. In reality, it would test Japan's industrial limits like never before. Kawasaki's first step was the Ki-60. A heavy interceptor built around the new engine. Engineers believed that speed alone would win battles, so they gave it a small wing area, thick armor, and big cannons. But when the prototype took flight in 1941, the dream fell flat. The Ki-60 was fast in a dive, yes, but sluggish everywhere else. Its high wing loading made takeoffs long and dangerous. It stalled too easily and handled like a brick compared to the nimble Ki-43 Oscar. Pilots hated it. By the time 3 prototypes were tested, everyone agreed. Japan's first inline-engine fighter was a failure. Yet inside the failure, there was a seed of brilliance. The lessons from the Ki-60 gave birth to something new, a lighter, more balanced design that would soon become the Ki-61 Hien. Engineers rethought everything. They widened the wings for better lift, streamlined the fuselage, and reduced armor weight to bring back maneuverability. Most importantly, they designed it to feel right in the pilot's hands. When the first Ki-61 flew in December 1941, it stunned its test pilots. The aircraft didn't just fly well, it felt alive. Stable, smooth, and responsive, it combined German muscle with Japanese finesse. It could dive without shaking apart, handle high speeds gracefully, and still turn tight enough to hold its own in a fight. By early 1942, during evaluation flights, it even outperformed several imported fighters, including the Bf-109E itself. For a brief moment, Japan believed it had found its perfect weapon, a swallow that could chase eagles across the sky. By early 1942, the new fighter, now officially named the Ki-61 Hien, or Flying Swallow, is ready to show the world what Japan's engineers had created. The first units to test it reported that it handled like nothing else in the Army Air Force. It was heavier than the old Ki-43, yes, but it sliced through the air with a firmness that inspired confidence. Test pilots noted how it dove faster than any Japanese plane they had flown, its long, pointed nose cutting through the slipstream like a spear. When production began, factory workers treated each airframe almost like a handcrafted masterpiece. Tolerances were tight, and the inline engine demanded a precision Japan's factories weren't used to. Even so, the first squadrons received their aircraft before the year's end. The Army classified it as the Type 3 Fighter Model 1, though the world would soon know it by another name, Tony. Its debut came quietly at first. During the Doolittle raid in April 1942, Allied crews glimpsed a fast, unfamiliar fighter and thought they were facing German machines. The rumor that the Luftwaffe had joined Japan spread briefly among American pilots, and the mystery only deepened when reports described the aircraft as a Japanese Messerschmitt. Intelligence officers, puzzled but intrigued, decided to assign a Western name for clarity. Mike came first, but was later replaced by Tony, a friendlier, more human nickname that somehow stuck. When the Ki-61 began serious frontline service in New Guinea and the Solomons in 1943, it proved to be both admired and cursed. On one hand, it could outdive and outclimb most Allied fighters at low and medium altitude. Its metal skin was strong, its self-sealing fuel tanks actually worked, and its engine didn't cut out during negative G. Maneuvers an advantage even over the famous Zero. Pilots who switched from older types called it the first Japanese plane that felt solid. On the other hand, maintenance crews despised it. The inline engine required delicate tuning, precise oil, and constant care, none of which were easy to find in jungle airfields under sweltering heat. Mechanics had to remove the entire top cowling just to reach simple components. Spare parts arrived slowly, sometimes never, so damaged planes were cannibalized to keep others flying. In combat, when everything worked, the Ki-61 earned grudging respect from its enemies. P-40 and P-39 pilots, expecting light and flimsy opponents, found themselves outpaced and surprised. General George Kenney, commander of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, even requested more P-38 Lightnings, believing they were the only Allied fighters that could reliably match Tony. Yet for all its brilliance, the Ki-61 was racing against time. Every mission pushed its fragile engine closer to failure. Every sortie demanded resources Japan no longer had. The fighter was a masterpiece caught in a collapsing system, a Pali machine built for a dream that war itself was destroying. As the war dragged into late 1943 and 1944, the Ki-61's strengths began turning into its biggest weaknesses. The elegant inline engine that once made it a marvel was now a constant source of frustration. The HA-40, based on the German DB601, required the kind of tight manufacturing tolerances and refined materials Japan could no longer guarantee. Wartime shortages meant substitute alloys, inconsistent fuels, and rushed factory work. Engines began failing in flight, sometimes seizing without warning. Mechanics nicknamed the plane Hien-san, said with a weary mix of respect and resentment, beautiful but temperamental. Pilots would often joke grimly that if the enemy didn't shoot you down, the engine might finish the job for them. Yet despite these troubles, they still loved how it handled when everything worked. It felt alive, like it wanted to fight. In a dive, it could chase Allied planes straight toward the ocean, pulling out at the last second while others shook apart. But as the Allies introduced new aircraft, the P-47 Thunderbolt, F-6F Hellcat, F-4U Corsair, and later the P-51 Mustang, the Hien began to show its age. These machines carried engines that produced 1,800 to 2,000 horsepower, while the Ki-61 struggled with just over 1,150. The difference was devastating. In head-to-head combat, Tony had to rely on tactics, surprise, and altitude advantage rather than raw power. Many Japanese pilots who had once dominated the skies now found themselves constantly climbing, diving, and dodging, hoping their fragile engines would hold. By early 1945, disaster struck again. Allied bombing raids targeted Japan's industrial core, and one of the first victims was the engine plant that built the Ha-40 and its improved version, the HA-140. Overnight, production of inline engines ceased. Hundreds of Ki-61 airframes sat unfinished, fuselages complete but with empty noses. Engineers faced a desperate choice: abandon them or find a new heart. In a stroke of practical genius, they chose to fit the Mitsubishi HA-112 radial engine already used in other aircraft. It meant redesigning the front section, adding a rounded cowling, and modifying the weight balance, but the result shocked everyone: the Ki-100. In test flights, the converted fighters not only matched but exceeded expectations. They were lighter, cooler running, and more reliable than the original Hiens. Pilots praised them as Japan's best late war interceptor, fast enough to meet B-29s at altitude, nimble enough to outturn Allied fighters, and sturdy enough to keep flying after taking hits. It was ironic. Japan's most advanced inline fighter had to be reborn with a radial engine to reach its full potential. Still, production came too late and in too few numbers to change the outcome. The skies over Japan were already filled with bombers and Mustangs. Yet, for those who flew it, the Ki-100 symbolized what the Hien had always been meant to achieve: a perfect harmony between engineering and instinct, between precision and survival. It was proof that even in the ashes of war, ingenuity could still take flight. If only for a moment. By the summer of 1945, Japan's skies were no longer its own. Allied bombers roared overhead daily, and the once mighty Imperial Japanese Army Air Force was a shadow of its former self. Yet among the chaos, the Ki-61 Hien and its successor, the Ki-100, continued to fly, piloted by men who refused to surrender the sky. Many of these pilots had grown up believing in the invincibility of Japanese air power. Now they flew knowing that each mission might be their last. Their bases under constant attack, their fuel supplies dwindling, their machines patched together with salvaged parts. The Hien story became less about victory and more about endurance. Those who flew Tony in the final months described a deep bond with their aircraft, a feeling of trust in its frame, even when the engine sputtered or failed. They spoke of its solid wings, its sharp dive, and its ability to bring them home when all seemed lost. The Ki-61 never matched the speed of a Mustang or the climb of a Lightning, but it had a heart that refused to quit. For many, that made it more than a machine. It was a companion in a losing war. When fuel grew scarce, some squadrons stripped their aircraft of guns and armor to save weight, turning them into desperate ramming interceptors against B-29s. Others hid their planes in forests, waiting for sorties that never came. By war's end, dozens of Hiens lay abandoned on airfields sleek, silent shapes representing both the ambition and exhaustion of a nation. In the years that followed Japan's defeat, the world mostly forgot Tony. Only aviation historians and surviving pilots remembered how extraordinary it had been, the only Japanese fighter powered by a German-style liquid-cooled engine, born from collaboration and built in defiance of industrial collapse. Those who restored surviving Hiens after the war found their construction remarkable, precise, beautifully balanced, and clearly inspired by European design philosophy. Yet the story of the Ki-61 was also a story of limits. It showed that brilliance on paper cannot overcome the realities of material shortages, exhausted workers, and relentless bombing. The Hien represented the moment Japan tried to shift from traditional lightweight dogfighters to heavier, high-performance interceptors, an evolution forced by the modern battlefield. Though it couldn't change the outcome of the war, it proved that Japanese engineers were capable of innovation equal to their Western counterparts when given the chance. The later Ki-100 stood as the final chapter in that saga, a practical, rugged machine that came too late to matter strategically, but earned immense respect from both friend and foe. Today, only a few restored Hiens remain, standing quietly in museums as symbols of a dream that soared too close to the storm. They remind us that technology, no matter how advanced, is shaped by the hands that build it and the world it is born into. Japan's Tony was never truly German, never fully Japanese, but something in between, a testament to the ambition, ingenuity, and tragedy of human flight during war. After the surrender, Japan's aviation industry was dismantled almost overnight. Factories that once produced engines and airframes were stripped bare or converted to civilian goods. Engineers who had spent their youth building weapons of war suddenly found themselves without purpose, their talents viewed with suspicion by the occupation forces. Yet, in the ruins of Kawasaki's production lines, the legacy of the Ki-61 Hien quietly survived, not as a weapon, but as a foundation. The same minds that had once wrestled with liquid cooling systems, aerodynamic drag, and weight distribution began applying their knowledge to peaceful machines. By the early 1950s, many of those engineers joined new ventures designing cars, motorcycles, and commercial aircraft. The precision learned from the Ha-40's tight tolerances taught them how to manufacture reliable automotive engines. In a quiet, indirect way, the Tony helped seed Japan's post-war engineering renaissance. The principles of aerodynamic efficiency, stress-tested metalwork, and balance that defined the Hien found echoes in the cars and planes that would later make Japan a technological superpower. When the nation finally returned to aviation in the 1950s under American supervision, a few of those former aircraft designers helped create the first Japanese jet trainers and eventually contributed to the development of the Mitsubishi F-1, Japan's first indigenous jet fighter since the war. They often said that the ghost of the Hien still lingered in their workshops, a reminder of how much they had learned from failure outside Japan. Surviving examples of the Ki-61 fascinated Western researchers. American intelligence units, curious about the mysterious Tony, shipped several captured aircraft back to the United States for study. Engineers at Wright Field disassembled the planes piece by piece, astonished by how closely the Ha-40 engine followed the German DB-601 design despite Japan's limited resources. Reports from the time noted that the Hien's craftsmanship was remarkably precise under the circumstances, though plagued by inconsistent metallurgy. Years later, aviation historians would call the Ki-61 one of the most misunderstood fighters of World War II, a plane judged more by its troubled service record than by its true design potential. Today, restoration specialists working on the few remaining airframes often speak of it with a kind of reverence. They describe the long, elegant fuselage as art more than machinery, a fragile beauty that speaks to both ambition and desperation. Visitors who stand before a restored Hien in a museum can almost sense the contradiction it embodies. The blend of European engineering ideals and Japanese craftsmanship forged under wartime pressure. It tells a human story as much as a mechanical one, a story of people who built something extraordinary in the worst of times, hoping it would help their country survive. And though the Ki-61 never changed the war's outcome, it endures as a symbol of persistence, the idea that even in defeat, innovation can leave behind a legacy far greater than the battlefield it once served. In the silence after war, the Ki-61 became more than just another relic of Japan's defeat. It turned into a symbol of what might have been. When the noise of engines and bombs faded, the story of Tony lived on in the memories of those who had touched it, the pilots who risked their lives flying it, the mechanics who cursed at its complexity yet admired its elegance, and the engineers who built it with trembling hands under the whine of air raid sirens. Many of them spoke later in interviews and memoirs, not about war or nationalism, but about the machine itself, about the feeling of seeing that long, slender nose catch the morning sun, about the hum of the Ha-40 warming up before a mission, about the pride of creating something beautiful in the middle of destruction. They remembered its faults, yes, the fragile engine, the heat, the endless maintenance, but they also remembered the quiet moments when the aircraft responded like an extension of their own body, smooth and precise, whispering through the clouds with the grace of a swallow. To them, the Hien was never just Tony. It was the sum of their effort, their youth, and their hope in a time when everything else was crumbling. When Japan rebuilt in the following decades, the Hien's story resurfaced in scattered ways, old blueprints rediscovered in archives, half-buried fuselages unearthed from jungle airfields, fragments of engines traded among collectors. Each discovery rekindled a spark of fascination for this strange, misunderstood fighter that had once baffled the Allies. Today, when one of the few surviving Ki-61 starts its engine at an air show, spectators stop and listen. The sound is unlike anything else, a deep, smooth tone that carries both nostalgia and melancholy. It doesn't roar like the American radials or whistle like a jet. It hums steady and proud, a voice from another world. People stare at the long, elegant shape, realizing that this was Japan's only fighter with a German-style heart, a machine that crossed cultures and philosophies in a time of chaos. In museums across Japan, plaques describe it simply as Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien, but enthusiasts still prefer its allied nickname, Tony. There's something human about that name, something fitting for a plane that straddled two worlds. In every rivet and curve, the Hien reflects a contradiction, fragile yet fierce, foreign yet distinctly Japanese, flawed yet unforgettable. Its story reminds us that history is not just about victories and defeats, it's about the dreams that take flight between them. The Ki-61's wings may never soar in battle again, But in memory, it keeps flying an echo of ambition, a whisper of courage, and a testament to how even in the darkest times, humanity can still create something that touches the sky. Decades after the war, the Ki-61's legacy refused to fade into dust. Aviation enthusiasts, historians, and restoration crews began to trace its scattered remains across the Pacific, rusted fuselages buried in jungles, shattered wings half submerged in rice fields, fragments preserved by villagers who once watched the skies burn. Each recovered part became a puzzle piece of history, a physical reminder of Japan's brief flirtation with European engineering ideals during a desperate era. What fascinated researchers most was not merely the aircraft's design, but what it represented: a bold divergence from Japan's doctrine of lightweight agility toward a philosophy of refined power and protection. The Hien marked a turning point, a recognition that air combat was evolving faster than tradition could keep up. When modern Japanese aviation students study the Ki-61 today, they don't just see a weapon. They see a symbol of transformation. It embodies both ambition and humility, the will to innovate even when defeat loomed. Restoration teams in Japan and abroad have spent years painstakingly rebuilding surviving airframes, often machining missing parts by hand, referencing faded blueprints or fragments of aluminum retrieved from forgotten runways. These projects aren't about glorifying war, they're about preserving craftsmanship, honoring ingenuity under pressure, and giving a voice back to the machines that history nearly erased. Every restored Hien tells a slightly different story. One sits in the Yamato Museum, gleaming under spotlights as visitors circle it in silence. Another, discovered on New Guinea's humid coast, still bears bullet holes from its final mission. And in the United States, a partially restored Ki-61 runs its engine once every few years, the deep vibration echoing across airfields filled with veterans and their families. Each time, people pause not out of awe for the war, but out of respect for the human effort behind the machine. The Ki-61's smooth, liquid-cooled voice stands out in a world dominated by the radial roar of its contemporaries. It sounds thoughtful, almost mournful, as if remembering the pilots who once called it home. In a strange way, the Tony has transcended its origins. It's no longer just Japan's German-inspired fighter. It's a shared artifact of human creativity under fire. Its story bridges nations that were once enemies, connecting engineers, historians, and dreamers who now study it not for what it destroyed, but for what it built: a spirit of innovation that outlived the war itself. When people gaze at the Ki-61 today, they see not a relic of defeat, but a messenger of progress, proof that beauty and ingenuity can survive even the most destructive storms. The flying swallow may have fallen long ago, but its shadow still glides quietly across history's sky, reminding us that even from the wreckage of war, the pursuit of flight continues to lift the human heart higher. As the camera fades to the quiet light of dawn, the story of Japan's Tony closes not with explosions or glory, but with silence. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien, once a symbol of hope and defiance, now lives on in the hum of history, its name whispered by curators, veterans, and aviation lovers who refuse to let its voice disappear. When sunlight touches the polished aluminum of a restored Hien, it feels as though time folds back, revealing the countless hands that once shaped it. Each rivet, each curve, carries the fingerprints of young engineers who worked by candlelight under air raid warnings, driven not by hatred but by the simple, human desire to create something that could endure. They didn't know that their creation would one day be studied by the very people who once fought against it. That is perhaps the greatest irony of Tony's story: an aircraft born from war, now uniting former enemies through shared admiration. Its story has become less about conflict and more about reconciliation. The line between foe and friend dissolves when you hear that smooth V12 engine start, its rhythm steady and calm, like a heartbeat from another era. The Hien stands now as a reminder that even in war, beauty can emerge. And even in defeat, dignity can survive. In Japan, students visit the museums where Tony rests, and teachers tell them not just about aircraft specifications or combat history, but about persistence. They talk about what it meant to design something extraordinary in impossible conditions. The Ki-61 teaches a quiet lesson that progress often grows from failure, that courage doesn't always look like victory, and that creation can coexist with chaos. For every broken part recovered from the jungles of New Guinea, for every faded logbook discovered in an attic, the Hien story rebuilds itself piece by piece, refusing to vanish. It has become a mirror for Japan's own post-war rebirth, a nation once torn apart by ambition, rebuilt through craftsmanship, humility, and learning. In the world of aviation, the Ki-61 is now seen not as an inferior copy of a European design, but as a bold interpretation, a Japanese signature written in steel and fire. And somewhere between the roaring engines of modern jets and the soft hum of vintage planes, the spirit of the flying swallow still drifts. It carries the message that flight, at its core, is not about domination but discovery. As the final shot pans upward, the clouds part and light floods the frame. The narrator's voice fades. The war ended. The skies grew quiet. But Tony kept flying in memory, in legacy, and in the endless pursuit of the human dream to rise above the storm. The screen fades to black, the engine sound lingers for a moment, then slowly fades away, leaving only the echo of wings that refuse to fall, long after the last propeller stopped turning. The Ki-61 Hien continued to exist not only in museums or books, but in the imagination of those who dream of flight. For Japan, the story of Tony became a chapter of self-reflection, a reminder of how innovation and tragedy often walk hand in hand. When people look at the surviving aircraft today, they don't just see a weapon from a lost war. They see a mirror of human ambition. The same ingenuity that once fueled destruction later powered peace, guiding Japan's rise from ruins into a nation defined by craftsmanship and precision. Engineers who once tuned the Ha-40 engines became the mentors of a new generation of inventors. Their students built the jetliners, high-speed trains, and cars that carried Japan into the modern age. And though few of them ever spoke of the war, many quietly acknowledged that their pursuit of perfection began in those dark hangars under the wail of sirens. The legacy of the Hien, then, is not one of defeat but of evolution. Its sleek fuselage and innovative spirit helped plant the seeds of Japan's post-war identity, disciplined, inventive, and endlessly curious. Across the Pacific, the fascination with Tony endures among historians and collectors. They gather at air shows and restoration hangars, trading stories, sketches, and parts recovered from forgotten islands. Each piece an engine plate, a control yoke, a bullet-riddled panel, represents a fragment of a story that refuses to die. To them, the Ki-61 isn't just a curiosity. It's a conversation between past and present. Every time the Ha-40 engine starts, it's deep. Smooth growl bridges 8 decades of history, connecting people who once faced each other across battle lines. The same sound that once signaled danger now inspires awe. It's proof that the machines of war can, in time, become teachers of peace, showing how craftsmanship and creativity can outlast conflict. When the light hits a restored Hien at the right angle, it gleams like a relic of an alternate history, gleams like a relic of an alternate history, glimpse of what Japan's aviation future might have been if the war had not consumed it. The Ki-61 silver skin reflects, not just the sky, but the story of a people who learned that strength without compassion leads only to ashes. As the final voiceover fades and the screen turns to black, only the sound of wind remains soft, endless, eternal. In that wind lives the whisper of Tony, a name once used to mark an enemy, now remembered as a friend. His story reminds us that no creation, however born, is ever truly lost. Somewhere high above the Pacific, the spirit of the flying swallow still glides free of nations, free of war, carrying the enduring truth that even from the ruins of conflict, beauty and purpose can rise again. And so, the story of Japan's Tony, the Ki-61 Hien, comes to an end, a machine born from war, shaped by ambition, and remembered through the quiet persistence of those who refuse to forget it. Its wings may never rise again, but its spirit still soars in every restored aircraft, in every echo of that smooth V-12 rumble, and in the hearts of all who believe that beauty can survive even the darkest of times. If this story moved you, if you felt the wind of history in those engines, don't let it fade here. Subscribe to the channel. Join our journey through forgotten skies, and help keep these incredible stories alive. Drop a like. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which aircraft, battle, or pilot story you'd like to see next, because history isn't just about the past, it's about remembering how far humanity has flown, and how high it can still go. This was Japan's Tony story. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.